This video is specially made for the celebration of the 2020 Human Rights Day, intended to bring about greater awareness to the unjust treatment subjected to the Roma minority, and commemorate the European Roma who suffer from racial abuse at the same time. Being one of the victimized groups suffered in the infamous Holocaust, Roma are indeed the target of racial discrimination as early as they migrated to Europe some 1,000 years ago from the Sindh area in northwest India, which has now become part of the south-central Pakistan. Like the Roma, Sinti is also an ethnic group originating from eastern India, only that they arrived in Europe around 400 years later than the former one. Thus, they are often referred to as the Roma collectively in general. In fact, the Roman word ziguana for Roma derives from a Greek word meaning untouchable. By the end of the 15th century, this large minority group had spread across the entire European continent, mostly in southern and eastern Europe. During this period, they had been enslaved in Hungary and Romania, some of which would last for over 500 years, among many other unjust methods subjected to them in order to suppress their cultural development. And all of the inequalities have occurred for a reason. They were and are still now untrustworthy, and this in the eye of many Europeans. It can be said that other than the identifiable racial difference they feature, it is the distinctive nomadic lifestyle which leads them to be generally perceived by others as sneaky outsiders and vagabonds. Dominated both by fear and suspicion, countries around Europe were able to marginalize Roma in ways such as imposing registration requirements on these antisocial stalkers and blaming them as the criminals of every seemingly rational crime. To give an instance, Roma in the German Empire were assumed as disloyal spies during World War I, meaning that registration with the police is required for them so as to keep track of their movement. The unprecedented racial discrimination against Roma, however, did not emerge until the German Nazi came into power, igniting the fuse of a forgotten segment of the Holocaust, the Roma Genocide. Immediately after Hitler's rise to power in 1933, this long-standing anti-Roma perspective was soon incorporated into the unjustified Nazi policy, along with several other evil social climates that provided convenient and virtually consistent targets shared by the then German Aryans. Unlike the Jews, who were more likely the scapegoat of inhuman treatment if they were pure-blooded, the pure Roma were contended harmless by the Nazi officials, while anyone who had partial Roma ancestors were of great threat to the explosive community Hitler determined to construct. Two main reasons resulted in these special targets were that according to the statistics on criminal records, the majority of Roma criminals were mixed, and that the government had realized the futile effort they made to put mixed-blooded Roma into permanent settlement, indicated that they insisted in being hostile towards the social norm and possessed a strong inclination towards idleness. What's more ominous was the fact that eugenics had emerged and soon flourished in the early 20th century in the West, along with the rapid improvement of racial categorization. Starting from July 1933, Roma and Scythian inhabited in Germany with hereditary illness. In this case, all the inferior mixed-blooded who could not escape the sharp claw of extremely biased local government, who exploited the law for the prevention of hereditarily diseased offspring during a time when the Nazis hadn't yet paid much attention to this innocence, were forcibly sterilized. While they were not the only group being involuntarily sterilized in the name of the privileged German Aryan, It is nonetheless important to be aware of the fact that compulsory sterilization carried out with the implementation of police force is one of the most inhumane acts against humanity, which not only disparages the fundamental human rights everyone deserves, but also proves the destructive and lasting impacts a discriminatory government system can bring to the society it dominates. The process of sterilization, while decreasing the overall mental and physical health of any patients during its operation of ligation of the fallopian tubes in women and vasectomy for men, was ironically seen as a brilliant way to produce abundant workforces for the construction of Lebensraum. In the same year, the first victims, though only a small portion of the Roman population, were relocated into the internment camps. The extremely ambiguous definition of feeble-mindedness, coupled with deep-rooted bias, eventually led to the tragic fate of Roma who became members of the Aryan's enemy, outlined in the Rhine citizenship law and the law for the protection of German blood and honor, established in September 1935. Together, they are known as the Nuremberg Laws, and this is only the second step towards unspeakable annihilation. Besides losing their rights to citizenship, which meant that the Roman within Germany could no longer escape their adversities with a valid passport. They were also implicitly forbidden from having any sexual relationship with the pure-blooded German as the subjects in the preposterous articles, not to mention practicing certain professions for a decent life. In order to achieve high efficiency over the course of eliminating those who fell under the category of undesirable, systematic identification of the Roman race was soon enacted with the help of developing science. Here is where the formal prejudice against the suspicious Roman villains became the field of the so-called criminal biology, a pseudo-scientific specialty designed to focus on providing rational evidence for the presumption that criminals are determined by their physical characteristics. After attempting to classify Romans through medical and anthropological studies, Dr. Robert Ritter came to an indefinite conclusion that there were about 30,000 Roma in Germany, which in turn enabled his team to undertake a thorough investigation of the Roma people through unwarranted approaches such as imposing political punishments upon those who refused to identify anyone they knew as Roma. In this way, Ritter was able to locate virtually all the Roma living in Germany. Consequently, everyone carrying the blood of Roman race was now clear targets of the Nazi authority, including children. From 1933 to 1939, a large number of Roman children were taken away from their families to special homes to be monitored in full time. Not surprisingly, these children were subjected to bullying in school until they were forbidden from attending the public school in 1941. Roman students who were truants, along with those who couldn't speak German, were perceived as either potential criminals or feeble-minded invalids, and were sent to special schools for segregation and harsh treatment. In July 1936, a month after a central office was established under the mission of combating the Roman nuisance, during which unreasonable raids were conducted against the vagrants, who were deemed to be the roots of the problematic economic depression, and some 400 Roma were interned in the Dachau forced labor camp, the first concentration camp for Roma, known in German as the Zigeunerlager, was built in the Marsen suburb of Berlin near a cemetery, where contagious diseases soon spread among 600 prisoners. Similar Roman camps were built in cities across Germany in the following 3 years, and around 4,000 to 5,000 Roma were sent to these camps. An Austrian Sinti named Bonioli records experience at one of these camps on June 28, 1939. The prisoners in charge of the closing laughed as they threw it at us. If you're tall, you got striped pants that were too short. If you're short, you got striped pants that were too long. I could not look any more ridiculous. I found thread and shortened my pants. It was initially decided by the head of the Ring Security Man Office on September 21, 1939, that all 30,000 German and Austrian Roma were to be deported from the Greater German Ring to the general government, where Poland had surrendered in the face of aggressive Nazi power within just a few weeks. The top civilian occupation official in this administrative unit, however, was not willing to accept hundreds of German inferiors, including Jews, into his region. The suspension of Roma deportation following this refusal in turn made the Ziguanalaga a long-term prisoner for nearly every Roma living in the Third Ring. While conditions in other camps were necessarily better off, victims confined in the first one located in Marsan along with the other two in Lackenbach and Salzburg were the most unfortunately tormented, who underwent dehumanizing torture, causing hundreds to leave this world forever. What's even more indignant was the unfounded intolerance many local Germans explicitly conveyed towards these innocents. In their point of view, the asocial neighbors whose close existence constantly threatened the safety of their superior community and contaminated the fountain of public morale. These demands were forceful enough that the resumption of deportations were eventually carried out in the spring of 1940. Among the first groups of approximately 2,500 Roma deportees, the vast majority in Lublin district died from starvation and intense labor, whereas it's highly probable that the survivors were murdered in the gas chambers. The seemingly ceaseless monstrous force continued to conduct its murders then, and in the autumn of the following year, Nazi police authorities even deported 5,000 Austrian Sinti to the ghetto for Jews in Large Poland. Among these victims were Roma who had either lived with their Aryan spouse or had a settled job for over 5 years. Even as these Sinti were required to live separately from the Jews, this meaningful act nevertheless indicated their continuously close racial relationship with the more miserable Jews, an ominous sign of their worst condition to come before long. Within the first months, nearly half of these blameless lives were claimed by extreme poverty. Life was, however, more dreadful for those who survived, whose eagerness to pull through soon vanished when they were locked into the gas van, along with their Jewish neighbors in the first months of 1942. It was not until 8 months later, during which the faint hope carried by those who still wished to be rescued by justice was mired completely by leaders of the Nazi power, who removed Roma from the jurisdiction of any German court, erasing the last mark of virtue from the Third Reich. Among these merciless authorities who deprived German Roma of every legal approach to regain freedom was Heinrich Himmler, the second most influential yet infamous Nazi leader. His decisions for one resulted in the mass deportation of all Roma from his exclusive community at the end of 1942, rendering only a few exemptions which were generally ignored by the officials during roundups. The majority of deportees, around 23,000, soon find themselves being confined in the gypsy family camp set up in the worst death camp of all, Auschwitz-Birkenau. The way some refer to Roma as the gypsies, for assuming that they were originate from Egypt, is also considered impertinent by many Roma for its fake meaning, which is often associated with fake bomb. Roman Margar, and Roma survivor from Auschwitz, recalled the gassing process of Jews.
I suddenly heard music. In the distance, violins were playing the Blue Danube. It was intended to calm the Jews going inside. Soap and towels in their hands, no doubt believing they were taking a bath. Except that it was not a bathhouse, but a crematorium. The Gypsy Orchestra was there, their music helping to make a smooth transition for the Jews from life to death.
To this point, the Nazi minister had found surgical sterilization quite inefficient for eliminating millions of infections while bringing highly noticeable effects, which in turn led to the adoption of medical experiments on the undesirable prisoners in order to develop a more advanced method of sterilization. Pseudoscientific experiments were conducted on Roman prisoners in Auschwitz by the SS medical researchers, causing inevitable suffering to fall on a great number of twins and dwarfs. Hazardous drugs were given, carbon dioxide was injected, radiation and X-ray were administered, but the most terrible torture was yet to come. Harsh conditions existing among every death camp, especially Auschwitz, soon contributed to the expansion of infectious diseases such as smallpox and typhus, coupled with several massacres directed against Roma in the gas chambers. Their population severely declined in the course leading up to the pinnacle of indiscriminate carnage on the night of August 2nd and 3rd. The Night of the Gypsies, known in German as the Zigeunernacht, proceeded in a way quite similar to the Kristallnacht. After transporting around 3,000 Roman men who were still capable of working, the SS guards stormed the Roman compound of Auschwitz furiously in their determination to liquidate what they believed to be worthless beings. Despite the condition of the victims, who were mostly ill, elderly men, women, or children, and whose desperate resistance motivated them to fight with all they had, these German police slaughtered virtually all of the 23,000 Roma in the gas chamber. Although the situation was undoubtedly the worst in the Third Reich, the majority of Roma resided in other countries occupied by Germans, such as Serbia and Vichy France, as well as those who had allied themselves with Germany, also suffered from deadly torture, being torn apart by anti-Roma hatred based merely on race. The genocide eventually ended with the surrender of Nazi power, but the deep-rooted discrimination continues to pervade throughout Europe, with the hypocritical post-war German criminal police taking over the record of Roma registry. Estimation of the total number of victims varies greatly, ranging from 200,000 to 500,000. In the subsequent Nuremberg trials, neither any Roma witness nor any virtuous prosecutors were present, leaving the judge to be blinded by contemptuous lies coming out of the mouths of deceptive German representatives, who are sure that their punitive measures were only directed against those Roma who committed criminal acts. Only 10 years after activists and researchers begin to rally, in the face of immoral disparity being perpetuated by silence for over 20 years, did the German parliament officially admit that it was their destructive racial prejudice which guides the Nazi to bring about fatal consequences to the innocent Roma. In an effort to seek greater attention and recognition of this tragic event from worldwide, several organizations such as the International Roma Youth Network and the Open Society Foundations were established not only to fight for the former victims who are on the verge of vanishing from human history, but also to promote universal caution towards the descendants of these courageous victims, because of the sole reason that they are still facing the historical bias in this morally advanced society, where rationality should always come first. By condemning the non-existing dark spot on human civilization, while recognizing the innocence of every Roman who was and is still shouldering the heavy burden of ignorant sentiment, we are indeed improving the quality of our own life, in view of the fact that we ought to prove our willingness to assume the sacred obligation as global citizens to combat corrupt values and consolidate equality as the permanent foundation supporting global welfare.